Good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody. This is Carrie Getz back with another episode of Careers for Women, Trades, and Vets in Tech and Data Centers. Today, we are lucky enough to have Sabine with us. Sabine, introduce yourself. Tell everybody why you're here.
Yes, thank you. I'm so excited for this conversation. So, I am Sabine Gedeon. I wear several different hats, but the ones that I'm most proud of are being a speaker, an executive coach to women, as well as a professional who does leadership development for our emerging leaders. And so I have a business that I have been running now for going on 5 years. We're just a couple months short from the fifth year anniversary. And,
Congratulations.
my focus and my passion, thank you. My focus and my passion is really looking at, organizations, looking at our next generation and how can we set them up to be the most successful, the most impactful as possible. So I'm excited to have this conversation with you, especially since when we talked before, we talked about women in being able to navigate and advance in the tech space, as well as what that looks like for the generation of individuals who are opting out of your traditional education spaces.
And I think that's really happening more and more often, right? That people, especially through COVID, a lot of people got fed up with the education system, didn't want to learn. I mean, video learning can be brutal, to be fair, right? And it's not for everybody. And honestly, especially in the data center industry, I would say probably 80 to 90% of our jobs don't really require that 4 year degree. Now, certainly engineering and a lot of that kind of stuff does, but there's a lot of other paths to the industry. And I think we have to meet people where they want to work. And for people that have had a horrible high school experience, the thought of going on to college, you'd rather gouge your eyes out with a spoon than 4 more years of that. So talk a little bit about what you're seeing in young folks, because I think this is going to be really, really helpful to a lot of employers that are working with a younger generation and a different generation that thinks differently, and talk a little bit about some of those non-traditional pathways.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I literally on my show, I'm doing a series around women and money, and I just had a young lady on, and she shared that the student loan debt is about $2 trillion, right, which is ridiculous. And so you look at the narrative. I'm technically considered a geriatric millennial. Um, Whoever coined that, I'm mad at them, but
Well,
still,
that's all
it's
right. I'm a geriatric boomer, so at least you're younger.
yes. And so, the narrative that we had for so long was, the way out, or the way towards the pathway towards wealth, or the pathway towards, really building that American dream for yourself, was to go through these 4 year institutions, then get out with all this debt, work your way, and then eventually, do the thing of buying the house and the car and the 2.5 children. Well, as we've seen, because so many people bought into that narrative, this debt is the debt is ridiculous. And so a lot of people, especially at that younger millennial and Gen Z, they're looking at these longer term financial responsibilities like a mortgage and everything else. And they're saying, actually, no, I don't want to do that. And because they don't want that burden, it's also causing them to look at education in a much different way, because we know, like, school sells you. I remember I got sold, oh yeah, get this 4 year degree and you're going to make $100,000 straight out of school. Yeah, not even half of that. So, you look at what's happening in society as a whole and why, individuals are making these decisions not to go through these schools. At the same time, when you look at organizations, especially in the tech space, in manufacturing, utility, right? These are industries that historically have not done a lot, or not have had to do a lot when it comes to recruiting, or when it comes to drawing in new talent, because they were staples. They were quote unquote safe. We know that there's no company that's safe. And now, as you have boomers who are leaving the workforce, a lot of these organizations haven't really put in programs to transfer that knowledge or to create these mentorship programs. So now with COVID, and as they accelerated these retirements because they were trying to save money, you had a slew of people leave, these particular industries. And now there's a huge gap. So these organizations and these industries in particular are challenged with the thought of, okay, now they're doing what they call the boomerang strategy, which is like bringing people back who retired either on a part-time or consultant basis. But at the same time, how do you change the narrative around manufacturing, right? Or in some of these tech spaces to make it sexy, to make it this environment that, this next generation wants to work in. And I know you do a lot of work with this, is really, breaking down that stigma of someone doesn't need to have that 4-year degree to be competent or to be trainable or to be willing to be coached. And so a lot of organizations, what I'm seeing, especially for the ones who are savvy enough, they are starting to partner with they're starting to partner with tech schools or two-year degree schools so that they can start to build that pipeline of individuals who are coming in with maybe, not that 4-year engineering degree, but they have enough of the skill set, if you will, to be able to do the work. And then they offer tuition reimbursement or some type of program so that if that individual wants to finish out their degree, they can do so with the support of the organization.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important note. And I preach on this all the time to students. There's a lot of kids, especially through COVID, that missed out on career days and going to work with your parents and all those things. And, seeing them work remotely at the dining room table is not quite the same experience, right? So they've missed that tutelage and they've missed that, and they don't really know what they want to do. And I think that we have a lot of these trade schools, VOTEC schools. And to be fair, my generation was the first one to tell everybody, you've got to have a 4-year degree. That's where the money is. That's where the good paying jobs are. And to be fair, there was a time when that was the case, right? But now nobody knows how to work with their hands. And so a lot of these trade jobs are paying way more than college degree jobs. And so what happens if you take a kid and you tell them, no, look, you're going to have to go to school. If they don't want to be there, they're not going to put it all into it, right? They're going to come out with the easiest degree they could, the simplest thing they could, and then they're still going to have to go get certified. So we're seeing, especially in the tech space, more and more companies start up internship programs and all. And like I said, you can always start. If you want to finish your degree, let them pay for it. They got billions of dollars. Yeah. And I think, too, from an employment standpoint, if you're investing in your people, you're going to have a lot more loyal people than, if you hire somebody that's already got the degree and they're chasing dollars, because as soon as they get offered $1 an hour more at your competitor, they're out the door because they got a student loan they got to pay for.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about how you see workforce development and how you see that working through young people. Like, give some folks some steps if they wanted to set up an internship program, kind of where that would go and how that would work.
Yeah. First and foremost, just understanding the landscape that we're in right now. When you look at the workforce as it is, you have millennials who are about 43% of the workforce, right? And that number is pretty steady at this point. I think we're the largest within the workforce. Then you have Gen Z, who are, before this month ends, about 5% of the workforce. And we're starting to see that even of that 5%, 50%, roughly 50% of them are opting not to go the traditional corporate route. So, and then you have the boomers and then you have the Gen Xers, right? So for organizations who are just now looking at their talent pipeline, or maybe they've had internship programs and they've just kind of used it as extra labor, this is a critical time for you because the next generation, if you will, they need to be convinced to come into your organization. So what is the value proposition? You look at, in this gig economy that we have now, you have so many young people, all ages really, who are just like, oh, I can be consistent on YouTube, or I can be consistent on this platform and start to get sponsorship and generate all this stuff. TikTok, right? Like that to them is fun. That is sexy. That is, okay, I can do what I love doing and get paid for it. And so that's the mindset that this generation has. I think that's the mindset we've all had. We were just, confined for a while, but this generation is like, no, I want to do work that, I enjoy doing, that gives back to me, that allows me to bring my whole self to work. So with that, organizations really have to put a lot more effort in, thinking through what is the value proposition to work here. Gone are there days where, they just put a job description up and like everyone's clamoring, to get into their organization. Unless you're Amazon or Meta or Google or Microsoft, that's not really the case for most organizations. So you have to look at it from the perspective of what is your current workforce, right? So look at the data. A lot of organizations have had to look at data, especially the last few years, with regards to their workforce due to all of the diversity, inclusion, and belonging efforts, right? So look at the data that you have. Who's on your team, so to speak. And then before, as we're in this space at the time of this recording, where a lot of organizations are, making really hard decisions of letting people go, rather than having that same mindset, and I used to be in HR, have that same mindset of, okay, well, who has the least amount of runway, who's ready to go, who's close to retirement, and doing these reactive, like, okay, let's give Johnny or whoever packages. Let's look at how can we be creative with those packages first and foremost, to say, hey, if you're looking to retire in the first year, we're happy to support you with that, but this is what we need you to do. So many organizations are losing people. They don't have SOPs. They don't have any processes documented, right? So if you have a large workforce who's going to retire, start with them. Start with making sure that you've created something that allows that knowledge transfer to actually happen. Then at the same time, start to look at your internal or your talent pipeline, meaning, okay, what are some of the local schools that we can partner with? What are some of the organizations? And of course, you want to embed DEI or DEIB in this as well, right? So organizations like En-ROADS, or all these other, like, local chapters, Perspanica, for talent that's coming out of school who are diverse, giving them the value proposition of saying, hey, whether you are, a lot of the recruitment happens at like that sophomore, junior, senior level. Let's take it back. Let's start partnering with some high schools. Let's start partnering with some vocational schools and creating these pipelines where they, back in the day, and I know there's some industries still have apprenticeships, but what does that look like if we were going to create an apprenticeship, right? What does that look like? When just to give you a backstory, when I got into corporate America, I started as a co-op. So I went into a program where for 6 months I worked at the company. Like I only had like 3 classes left. And so it allowed me to work at the company full time, finish out my classes. I got paid as probably like an intern level, but I got the job experience as well as being able to finish out school. So being able to create that space so that people are indoctrinated. At that point, once I got into that company, I worked at that company for 5.5 years. Like I would have stayed at that company like for forever. But life had different plans. But you talked about loyalty before. That's how you create loyalty. That's how you get people to drink the Kool-Aid, so to speak, and get that buy-in. When you can get them when they haven't been exposed to other organizations, you can bring them in, you give them opportunities to develop, to grow, and then you partner them with the people who are ready to retire or the people who are, maybe 2 to 3 years out. And you create the space, you create the programs that allow them to work closely together, where on both sides they're teaching each other.
Yeah, and I think the organizations that do an exceptional job of that, I know DataBank has a really good program where if you're a new hire, they automatically, you can apply and be assigned a mentor that'll help you through the industry. Because the tech industry, there's a lot to figure out, right? And I think it's unfortunate, but a lot of people get scared off of tech because it's technical and they think that they have to be good at math or they have to be good at coding. And those are two very small pieces of the whole great big industry, right? We can take in all of the construction trades and all of, anything IT, anything coding, anything networking, storage related, all of those things. Plus, there's sales and marketing and accounting efforts around all of that. So it's probably one of the largest industries. And what people don't realize is it's also one of the largest ongoing apprenticeships because we've all learned from each other, right? The curriculum's not there for data centers. That's how we learn. We go to conferences, we learn from each other, we figure out how each other works, not just in our industry, but how that impacts all of the surrounding bits of the ecosystem with it. And you bring up a really good point in that matching older people that are on their way out with the younger crew is a great way to achieve that, and through those mentorship programs. But I do think also that we have to teach younger people how to be better mentees, right? We have to teach them how to make the ask. So, what are some of the soft skill coachings that you guys do, and how do you work through some of those things?
Yeah, that's a really great question. That in and of itself is a real huge challenge, right? Because and I know we're generalizing here, but you think about as we're talking about tech, the Gen Z, they've always had technology in their lives, right? Like from the time that they were babies. I remember my niece at like 2, she knew how to go on YouTube, she knew how to like get her videos and everything else. And so, part of that, the downfall, if you will, or the challenge with that is that we also have a huge, large portion of our population who, from a communication standpoint, because of the way they've learned how to communicate, does not always necessarily translate to corporate. So, what does that look like? Also, what I've noticed and what I've seen, and again, these are generalizations, that this generation, they are super passionate about things that are related to social justice through, with regards to the environment. And so there is this expectation that they have around, what the organization owes them. And I'm using air quotes here. And then the third piece is really around what does that look like when you have people who are, maybe the Xers or the millennials or even the boomers who are seeing these younger talented people as they see their children. And so there's become like in many cases like this parenting type relationship versus this coaching and this mentoring relationship. So one of the things that I work with organizations, or especially when I talk with schools, is first of all, as you're going into an organization, and I know, the expectation for us to have, or the fact that we expect 22-year-olds or 20-year-olds or whoever to know what they're going to be for the rest of their lives, that's not fair. I'm in my 40s and I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to be for the rest of my
I'm
life.
62 and I still reinvent myself. So there you go.
Right. And so the traditional corporate mindset is when someone comes in to an organization, like there is a pathway, right? Or they'll figure it out. Rather than going through that route, for those who are coming into the organization, it's really about doing 2 things, right? Or maybe 3 things. Going into the organization or the environment and looking around, like what is it beyond the culture, beyond, the perks and all that other stuff. Where do you see yourself? Are there role models within the organization, or are there departments, or are there activities or projects that you want to work on, right? First and foremost, communicate that to your manager. I remember when I first got into corporate America, I wanted to be an HR business partner within like 6 months. And I remember one of my managers was like, "Oh yeah, you need about 20 years of experience before you can move into that." But there was never really a direct, here's how you do it. These are the skills that you need. And so helping them and supporting them and asking as a manager, if you will, what is it that you enjoy? Think about the work that you do. What are the pieces that you enjoy? What are the pieces that if you never had to do again, you would never want to? Or what are some of the projects that you've worked on that you've been really excited? And so you coach them to help them understand, okay, these are the things I like. These are the things I don't like. These are the things that I recognize that I may need to work on. Then you put the charge, and I'm saying you as in the manager or the leader, you put the charge on them to say, okay, if you want to learn, X, right, coding, right, I'm gonna set you up on a project. I'm gonna set you up with someone. I want you to, figure out a plan of how you're going to do that, what you're going to learn, what's an appropriate timeline, what support do you need. This breaks that stigma or that expectation that like every manager has to like be the one who like drives the career of their employees. No, put it back on them. If this is what they want to do, your role as the manager or the leader is to block and tackle or to give them the support and the resources. Let them figure out the plan. That starts to teach them what it looks like to have agency over themselves and agency over their careers. The other piece is really, the networking side. When I got into corporate America, and even, as I mentor individuals coming in, there's a mindset of, okay, I just got to put my head down. I got to get the work done. And, someone's going to recognize me. That is not the language of corporate America. It's about building your network. And I like to call it the success circle, right? Identifying people who are in the organization who could potentially be a mentor, identifying people who could potentially coach you within the organization. That could be your manager, that could be someone else in another department that you work closely with. Identifying peers, that if you're like a really super ambitious person, you want peers around you that are going to push you, that are going to help elevate you and pull you up on those hard days. And then you also want to understand, what is the talent management process, right? Because in most organizations, there's a sponsor lurking somewhere, there's an advocate lurking somewhere. You can either understand who is that person for you, or go find someone, like have a conversation, just you and I connected in that way, right? Like, hey, I'd love to learn more about you and what you do. Asking for the 30-minute, coffee, or the 30-minute lunch, or whatever the case may be. Start to let people know that this is what you want. And then also learn from more people outside of your immediate department what they're doing, because that might give you some ideas of how to move forward. And then the last piece is, once you've communicated to your manager what you want to do, you start to build a network within the organization. I then say, start to look outside of the organization, not to leave necessarily, but to start to look at, okay, if my organization doesn't necessarily have, X role, does that role exist in the environment, in the marketplace? What are the requirements? What are the skill sets? And then you build that into your development plan, so that maybe if a position doesn't exist today in your organization, it doesn't mean that you have to leave to go to the next place, for that dollar extra or whatever it is. You could then, because you've demonstrated that you can, create a plan, move towards it, you can then try to negotiate within your own organization for an opportunity to either do it as a hybrid role or to create a role, as long as, of course, if there's a need for it in the organization. But I think it's thinking outside of the box and having managers and leaders who are focused on, how do I retain this person? Not how do I make them happy, because you can't make anybody happy, but how do I retain this person, and how do I draw out of them their own creativity when it comes to navigating and career pathing their own career.
And I think that is, you bring up some really good points. And I will say the two that really strike me is, one, if you're in the mentee position, you have to know what you need, right? You have to be able to make that ask. And it doesn't have to be your only ask. It can be an iterative process. It can change from one day to the next, 1 week, 1 hour to the next, as far as that goes. And the other thing is, as a manager, you have to create that environment where they feel safe to make the ask, right? Where they're encouraged to make that ask. And I think organically that happens a lot. And even outside of a formal mentor-mentee relationship, I think it just happens when you start building that network. And you are nothing without your network. I've said that a million times. I am nothing without my network. They're everything. So I think as you start building that both internally and externally, that's where some of those really, I guess, profound and life-building, life-changing events start to happen. Is you have to be open to those conversations, and it has to be in person and not over a screen,
Yeah. And I mean, if we look at where we are today, I mean, yes, there is a huge debate around, whether it's people are more productive when they're in the office or whether they're more productive outside of the office. We saw for 2 years, work still got done, right? Maybe it wasn't at like optimal, but work still got done. As we look, especially in the tech space, right? A lot of these organizations, they are, hybrid or remote only. I think that's the other piece as you're looking to build these talent pipelines, considering what does that look like when you've removed, if you will, the human connection or the opportunity to have those water cooler conversations. This is why the mentoring and having the buddy becomes even more important, because we all need to know that there's like someone that we can go to, someone that we can connect to when we join an organization, big or small. So taking into account with, the fact that from a learning perspective, I know a lot of learning and development departments have had to shift that, because now, with neurodiversity and all these pieces, like, well, people are learning differently and people are absorbing, and well, maybe they're not learning differently, but we're starting to acknowledge that people learn differently and they
Right.
absorb information differently. So what does that look like? How do we create that space where they feel immediately from day one, or matter of fact, before day one, that they are part of this organization and that they have people that they can connect with? I think that that's a huge piece. The connection that we've lost. We've absolutely lost it. Even though the world has like opened up to a certain standpoint, there is a part of us that, I don't know about you, but I think I became an introvert from being, maybe I'm an ambivert, but it feels like now it's like, oh, wait, if I don't have to step outside, I don't want to. Well, when you're trying to build an organization and you're trying to build a culture and where people feel included and people feel like there's room for opportunity, that also means that there's a lot more work that needs to be done to ensure that, people do feel included from day one. And that requires a lot more manpower, if you will, or focus from the managers, from the leaders, as well as, whoever is sitting in the talent management or the learning and development seat.
Sure. And 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 I will say too, as these topics get to be more and more popular and get talked about more and more, that I think we do have to be careful to really stress that mirror economics, that self-reflection, that you have to be able to take that hard look at yourself and figure out what you need, and what matters to you in your career. And what mattered to you a year ago might not matter at all now. You might you might shift and do something completely different, but you have to be open to those situations to help you discover what those things are.
Yeah. There's a part of me that I totally agree with you. There's a part of me that feels like, not that I believe that it's an organization's responsibility, but I feel that the organizations who could somehow provide support in this way might fare a lot better when it comes to development. Let's think about it. Like, most of our lives, like, we're mirroring the people who are around us, whether it's in school, teachers, parents, whatever the case may be, and we get into corporate America. A lot of people, even 30s, 40s, 50s, they still don't necessarily know who they are. They may know what they're good at. They may know what they're capable of doing. They may have an idea of what's possible. But when I think about my career, when I think about, people that I've coached, very few people can say that they had a manager, the epitome of good leadership, as we see all these memes, right, is being able to help people reach their highest potential. Well, most people don't know what their highest potential is. Like, you can't help someone reach something that they have not yet tapped into. So the question becomes, how can leaders shift, or how can organizations as a whole shift their understanding and their approach to having employees? For a very long time, and even still to this day, right? It's product or service, customers, and employees, right? And the employees are the ones that do the work. Now, if we could take a step back and look at it, okay, these are not employees, so to speak. These are human beings. These are human beings with desires. These are human beings with passions. These are human beings with emotions. These are human beings who, there's something in this for them, that they come into this every single day. As leaders start to step away from this mindset around what it is to have employees versus what it looks like to have a group of people, a group of like-minded people with similar, missions, similar values, all of those pieces coming together to achieve a goal, that's going to look a lot different. Like that's what we see on sports teams, right? Having that mindset in corporate and organizations, I think will completely shift what we value in terms of productivity, or what we value in terms of success. Because when we're so focused on whatever the end goal is, we forget that, people don't like failure. People don't like change. People don't like, feeling like they're not, at their primal best, if you will. So the question then becomes, how do we start to make decisions and create spaces that take these things into account versus the top down, like, this is what we're focused on, this is what it's going to be, and if you can't perform to this, then you're out of here, or you're on a performance improvement plan, versus saying, okay, you know what, there needs to be some room for failure, right? And we're not going to say it's okay to fail all the time, but we're also not going to penalize people when they fail. Or there's redefining what success looks like. Success used to be first one in, last one out. Success now is, we have a KPI. We're going to set together an actual time frame that makes sense, and I am going to check in on you to make sure that you're meeting this goal. And when you don't, we're going to have a conversation on what happened or why you missed it, and then figure out, do we need to iterate the plan.
Sure. And I mean, a lot of that's just communication. And I think, to your point earlier, is everybody got ostracized and individualized during COVID. We've lost some of those communication skills, I think. And, it's going to be a while before they come back, and certainly come back in especially, people that are just learning to work now, right? On top of all that. Well, we are bumping up close to our time. So any parting words you want to leave people with? What, key to success, how to find you? Of course, for all of you listening, we will put links to everything in the description for the podcast, of course. But any parting words?
Yeah, the thing that I will say, and we talked about this a little bit, when it comes to networking, because many of us are in this space of isolation, or, whatever you want to call it, right? Whether we're hybrid or we're working remotely, this is the time to really focus on building your social capital. And so we're all familiar with financial capital. We're all familiar with that. But what does that look like with your social capital? If you look at your network, or the people that you surround yourself with, as, valuable entities that are part of your life, I think we would, especially women, and even the young people who don't quite know how to network or what that really looks like, it's really looking at times like this. How do I make the most of my connections? That doesn't mean that you have to go out there and connect with like 10,000 people on LinkedIn, but who are you connected with now? When was the last time that you checked in on that, first manager? When was the last time that you checked in on that coworker? Right? This is the time where, I think the percentages now are 85% of the jobs that are obtained are through networking. Exactly. There no longer are the days of, just posting your resume to a job board and, you're going to get a call. Yeah, that works, but that's minimal. And so if you're really thinking about, how do I take control over my career? How do I navigate? How do I take the lead, if you will? It's going to require you stepping outside of your comfort zone and building relationships with people. And if you're kind of like, I'm an introvert and I don't want to be around at networking events, cool. There are platforms like LinkedIn where you can do that. There are platforms, there are groups, there are all types of social societies, if you will, associations, trade associations that you can join, that you can build those relationships, because you're going to need those people at some point, and or they might need you to help you advance in your career.
Yeah, and I would say, don't ignore your competitors, right? I know a lot of people that have just made that cutoff, like, I'm not going to talk to that person because we compete, but today's competitor might be tomorrow's boss. So don't fall into that trap either. Well, Sabine, thank you so much for your time today. I'm sure that everybody got something amazing out of this. For those of you listening, we certainly look forward to you listening on other editions of our podcast series. Check us out. We love your comments. Please leave feedback. Thanks, and have a great day.
Thank you.